Hey, Stoic warriors, you think you're in control, but most of your reactions are being pulled by something outside of you. A word triggers you, an opinion shifts you, a situation throws you off, and just like that, your state is no longer yours. That's how control is taken without force. Quiet, subtle, constant. Most people live like this and never question it. But there's a single shift, a rule so simple, yet so ruthless, that cuts that control off instantly. Once you see it, everything changes. You stop reacting, stop being moved, stop giving your power away without realizing it. And from that point on, no one controls you, unless you allow it. Here's what nobody tells you. The people who hurt you the most, they don't always come with weapons. They come with timing. They know exactly when you're tired, when you're doubting yourself, when your walls are down. And in that moment, one sentence from them lands differently. It doesn't just sting. It rewrites your entire mood, your entire day, sometimes your entire self-image. You walk away from that conversation, and you're not the same person who walked into it. That's not an accident. That's how emotional leverage works. And you've been on the wrong end of it your whole life, without even knowing it had a name. Every person who has ever made you feel small, they didn't shrink you. You handed them the scissors. Not because you're weak, but because nobody ever showed you what was actually happening in those moments. Nobody sat you down and said, the second you react without choosing to, you belong to whatever triggered you. That's the raw truth. Your reaction becomes their remote control. They press a button, you move. They say something, you spiral. They go silent, you beg. And the most brutal part, you die defending yourself as a strong person, while living in a pattern that contradicts it every single day. Marcus Aurelius wrote, not for anyone else, but for himself, in private, in the quiet of his own war. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He wasn't talking about obstacles outside of him. He was talking about the war within. The moment you stop fighting your own reactions and start mastering them, the thing that was meant to break you becomes the very thing that builds you. That's not poetic. That's psychological. That's the mechanism of real power. And right now, this video is about that mechanism. Not motivation, not surface-level advice. We're going 5 layers deep into the human psychology of control, reaction, and liberation. 5 points that will feel uncomfortably familiar, because this has happened to you. Maybe yesterday, maybe this morning. Maybe it's happening right now in the background of your mind while you're watching this. And by the end, something in you will shift. Not slowly, instantly. Like a door you didn't know existed just opened inside you. Drop this in the comments right now. I am uncontrollable. Now let's get into it. Point 1. The moment you react, you hand them the power. There's a moment, and you know this moment, where something happens and your body moves before your mind does. Someone disrespects you and your voice raises. Someone ignores you and your whole energy collapses. Someone questions your worth and suddenly you're in your head for hours, rebuilding a case for why you're enough. That moment, that fraction of a second where something external pulls a response out of you, that's where your freedom dies. Not dramatically, quietly, every single time. Here's the psychology behind it. When you react automatically, your nervous system is running a program that was written by your past, by old wounds, old fears, old versions of you that needed to protect themselves. That program doesn't know the difference between a real threat and someone's opinion. It treats both the same. So when someone criticizes you, Your system responds like survival is on the line. And in that state, you're not responding to the present. You're responding to every time this ever hurt before. That's why one comment can wreck you for days. It's never just the comment. It's everything the comment reminded you of. Epictetus, a man who was literally born into slavery, who had every reason to be consumed by bitterness and rage, said this: "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And understand who this came from. A man with no freedom, no power, no rights, who still found something inside him that nobody could touch. He understood something most free people never do. Your reaction is the only territory that is fully, completely, unconditionally yours. The moment you surrender it, you are more enslaved than he ever was. So the next time someone does something that pulls at you, pause. Not to be passive, not to suppress, but to choose, because there is a version of you that doesn't flinch, that doesn't collapse, that doesn't hand the remote to whoever is loudest in the room. That version isn't cold. That version isn't numb. That version is sovereign. And sovereignty doesn't beg, doesn't spiral, doesn't perform emotion for an audience. It simply decides. And in that decision, no one has power over you anymore. Point 2. Your triggers are a map to your chains. Most people spend their entire lives running from what upsets them, avoiding certain people, certain conversations, certain situations, building their whole life around not being triggered. And they call that peace. But it's not peace. It's a cage with better lighting. Because the thing you keep running from isn't out there. It's in you. And every time something triggers you, every time a specific word, a specific tone, a specific kind of silence from a specific kind of person makes your whole world feel unstable, that trigger is not your enemy. It's a map. It's showing you exactly where your unhealed places are, exactly where someone still has access to you that you never consciously gave. Think about the things that bother you most. Not surface annoyances, deep triggers, the ones that make your voice shake, the ones that keep you up at night replaying a conversation. Why does being ignored affect you the way it does? Why does someone doubting your capability cut deeper than it should? Why does a certain tone of voice from a certain type of person make you feel like you're 10 years old again with no control over anything? That reaction isn't random. It has a root. And until you find the root, you will keep watering the wound without knowing it. People won't even have to try to control you. Your own unprocessed pain will do the work for them. The Stoics called this prosos, self-observation without judgment, the discipline of watching yourself, not criticizing, not spiraling, not justifying, just watching. Where do I tighten? Where do I collapse? Where do I perform strength while falling apart inside? Because the person who knows themselves at that level, completely, ruthlessly, honestly, cannot be manipulated. You cannot weaponize someone's wounds against them if they've already faced those wounds themselves. That's not just philosophy. That's psychological armor that no person, no situation, no betrayal can penetrate. Your triggers are not proof that you're damaged. They are proof that something in you is still waiting to be understood. Go there, not because it's comfortable, but because on the other side of that understanding is a version of you that nobody can reach. Nobody can shake. Nobody can move without your permission. The map was always inside you. You just had to stop running long enough to read it. Point 3. The space between stimulus and response is where you are reborn. There is a space, tiny, almost invisible, Most people blow past it every single day without knowing it exists. It lives between what happens to you and what you do about it, between the insult and the anger, between the betrayal and the breakdown, between the rejection and the story you tell yourself about what that rejection means about your worth. That space, that fraction of a moment, is the most important real estate in your entire life. Because whoever controls that space controls you. And right now, for most people, that space is being controlled by habit, by fear, by old pain, by other people's words living rent-free in their heads. But the second you take ownership of that space, everything changes, permanently. Viktor Frankl survived Nazi concentration camps, watched people he loved die, lost everything a human being can lose, and came out of it with one conclusion that shook the entire field of psychology. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. This wasn't written from comfort. This was carved from the deepest human suffering imaginable. And if a man standing in that darkness could find that space and choose, what is your excuse? What is the trigger in your life so powerful that it exceeds what he faced? The space exists. The only question is whether you're willing to live in it. Here's what living in that space actually looks like. It's not meditating on a mountain. It's not being emotionless and distant. It's standing in the middle of chaos, someone screaming at you, life falling sideways, everything feeling urgent and painful and real, and finding one breath. One moment of I see what's happening, and I choose what comes next. That's it. That's the whole practice. One conscious breath between the fire and your response to it. It sounds small, but that one breath is the difference between a man who is lived through and a man who decides how he lives. That one breath is where your entire identity shifts from reactive to unbreakable. You were not built to be moved by everything. You were built to move through everything. Point 4. Silence is not weakness. It is the weapon of the sovereign mind. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that silence means you lost, that if you don't defend yourself, people will think you're guilty, that if you don't explain yourself, people will misunderstand you, that if you don't react, people will walk over you. So you learn to speak up every time, fight back every time, defend your name, your decisions, your character, every single time someone questioned it. And where did that get you? Exhausted, drained, constantly in battles that didn't deserve your energy, constantly proving yourself to people who had already decided what they thought about you before you opened your mouth. You were never defending yourself. You were feeding the fire with your own hands. Here's the psychological reality that most people are never told. When you over-explain, you reveal your insecurity. When you argue with every accusation, you give that accusation more power than it deserves. When you react loudly to someone trying to provoke you, you tell them the button works, and they will press it again and again. But when you go silent, when you look at the chaos and simply choose not to enter it, something shifts in the room. People don't know what to do with someone who can't be provoked. It unsettles them, because they were counting on your reaction. Your reaction was their confirmation that they matter, that they got to you, that they still have access. Your silence revokes that access completely. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, was known for speaking rarely and precisely. He said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen more than we speak." But deeper than that, he understood that a person who controls their tongue controls their mind. And a person who controls their mind controls their life. Silence is not absence. Silence is presence at its most powerful. It is the loudest statement you can make without making a sound. It says, "I see you, I understand what you're doing, and I refuse to participate." The most powerful people in any room are rarely the loudest. They are the ones who speak when it means something, who react when they choose to, who walk through storms without becoming the storm. That is not passivity. That is mastery. And mastery is the one thing nobody can take from you. Point 5. When you master yourself, no one can master you. Everything we've talked about leads here. Every trigger you face, every reaction you catch, every silent moment you choose over a war that wasn't worth fighting, it all leads to this single destination: self-mastery, not perfection, not emotionlessness, not becoming some cold, detached version of yourself that feels nothing. Real self-mastery is something far more human than that. It's feeling everything: the anger, the pain, the longing, the frustration, and still deciding who you want to be in the middle of all of it. It's being fully alive and fully in control at the same time. Most people think those two things are opposites. They're not. They are the highest expression of what a human being can become. Here's what self-mastery looks like in real life. It's the moment someone tries to humiliate you publicly, and instead of shrinking or exploding, you simply smile and move forward. It's when someone who hurt you deeply expects you to beg or break, and you do neither. It's when life removes something you built, something you loved, something you needed, and instead of collapsing into victimhood, you rebuild with a clarity you never had before. These moments aren't superhuman. They are deeply, entirely human, but only available to the person who has done the internal work, who has sat with their own darkness long enough to stop being afraid of it. Marcus Aurelius, leading an empire, facing betrayal, dealing with war, loss, plague, wrote to himself in his journal, "Confine yourself to the present, not the wound from yesterday, not the fear of tomorrow, the present, this moment, this decision, this breath." Because the person who lives entirely in the present cannot be haunted by the past or paralyzed by the future. And a person who cannot be haunted or paralyzed cannot be controlled. They are free in the truest sense of the word, not free from pain, free from being destroyed by it. You have spent years giving people access to your peace that they never earned. You have handed your mornings to people who don't deserve your nights. You have let opinions that came from small minds live in your large one and take up space they were never qualified to occupy. That ends now, not tomorrow, not when things get easier, now. Because self-mastery is not a destination you arrive at. It is a decision you make every single day, in every single moment, when the pull to react tries to override the choice to rise. Nobody can master the person who has already mastered themselves. You came into this video one way, and if any of this landed, if any of these 5 points felt like someone was describing your life out loud, then you're leaving it differently. Not because I gave you something new, but because I showed you something that was already in you, waiting to be recognized, waiting for you to stop running from it and finally turn around and face it. The Stoic rule is not complicated. It never was. It is simply this: you cannot control what happens to you, but you will always control who you are in response to it. That's the whole thing. That's the rule that every emperor, every philosopher, every person who ever built something unbreakable in the middle of chaos lived by. It's not about being hard. It's not about being cold. It's about being so deeply rooted in yourself that when the wind comes, and it will always come, you bend, but you never break. You feel, but you never collapse. You rise when everything around you says, "Stay down." The people who controlled you, they had power, because you didn't know this yet. Now you do. And knowledge like this doesn't sit quietly. It changes how you walk into rooms. It changes how you respond to disrespect. It changes the standard you hold for what gets access to your energy, your time, your peace. It changes you from the inside out, permanently, irreversibly. You were never meant to be lived through. You were meant to be lived as, fully, powerfully, on your own terms. Nobody controls you now, and they never will again. Type this in the comments right now. I am free.